3 years ago when Apple redesigned the MacBook Air, they got a lot right. They gave us a modern design with minimal bezels, a good keyboard, an excellent trackpad. They made the MacBook Air uniformly thin all around, and they even gave us the MagSafe port back. But they also got a lot wrong. They increased the starting price by $200, and the M2 version even had a performance downgrade over the M1 version because the base model included slower storage. However, with the M3 version, Apple did fix some of this. So the base model, once again, got the same storage speeds as the base model M1 version, and they dropped the price by $100. But it still wasn't exactly the best MacBook value. There was a lot of ifs, ands, or buts about going for that laptop. However, this time, with the M4 MacBook Air, Apple may have finally gotten it right, because I hope this isn't too good to be true. Now, you may be looking at this M4 MacBook Air and wondering, what's the big deal? Isn't it exactly the same as that 3-year-old M2 MacBook Air you were just showing us? And yes, design-wise, this is exactly the same laptop, with the only difference being is that this is the new sky blue color option. And yes, this is a very nice color. I actually really like this light blue color. I like it a lot more, and they still sell this color option, by the way, than the midnight color option that was offered on the M2 and M3 MacBook Airs. You can see this gets very fingerprinty, very smudgy, whereas because this is a lighter color, it doesn't really show off fingerprints as much. So even though it's not as saturated, not as bold as the midnight color, I think this is a better shade of blue, and I think it's a pretty nice color choice. But that's the only design difference to talk about with the M4 MacBook Air. Internally, I guess for a new feature, something that is kind of different than the M2 or M3 version is that this does get a new webcam. So it is a 12 megapixel center stage webcam. So basically what this camera does is it can track you and move around. Now the camera itself isn't physically moving, but it basically has like an ultra wide angle field of view, and then it will crop in on your face and then basically use software as you move around to follow you. The webcam does look good though. One of the problems with some of the center stage webcams is it didn't really produce that much detail, but with these new 12 megapixel center stage webcams, they seem to be producing a much better result. And even with like the default view, I think it looks a little bit better than the M3 MacBook Air's webcam. Other than that though, right, it's the same design, still a great keyboard, still an excellent trackpad, still a good display. It's an LCD display with 500 nits of brightness. It looks good, the colors are really accurate, but it's not as good as the MacBook Pro display, obviously, which has a mini LED display with better contrast ratios, deeper black levels. It can do 120 hertz, ProMotion, so it's a better display. But this laptop comes in at a much lower price point than that MacBook Pro. It's now a $600 price difference. So for this price point, at $1,000, it's a good display. Like, you're not gonna complain if you take this home. It looks fine. But yeah, it's the same laptop. What's the difference? Well, the difference is internal. So instead of the M3 or M2 chip, you are now getting an M4 chip. Now that might not sound like that big of a deal, but it is actually a pretty big performance upgrade. Compared to the M3 chip, it's about a 20% improvement in single core and multi-core CPU performance. So the best way that I can illustrate the value for this thing, at least for CPU performance, is that it has about the same CPU performance as an M3 Pro MacBook Pro from last year. That was the $2,000 model. So just looking at it from that standpoint, it's a pretty good value in terms of performance. Now, what does that mean for basic users? Because a lot of people are always like, well, basic users don't need that much performance, but the M4 chip is incredibly snappy. So if you're getting this and you're just web browsing, using social media, messaging people, using email, spreadsheets, doing presentations, word processing, basic stuff. The great thing about this MacBook Air is that you click on an app and it opens instantly. There's almost no delay now between opening a lot of these basic apps and how long it takes to load and open. This also has more starting memory than when the M2 or M3 version shipped. Those shipped with 8 gigabytes memory. Apple did bump up the memory to 16 gigabytes briefly when they introduced the M4 MacBook Pro a few months ago, but if you bought those machines fresh, they only came with 8 gigabytes. Well, this M4 machine comes with 16 gigabytes. That also means that you can have a lot more of these apps open in the background and you can use a lot more apps at once without having to swap to the internal storage on here, which means that performance across the board is just gonna feel snappier and faster because you have double the memory to work with. Even just using this machine for basic tasks and having a few apps open, I already got to like 9 gigabytes of memory on this machine. So if that was on an older M2 or M3 machine, the performance would probably be just a little bit slower because of that. Well, on this new M4 machine, you don't have to worry about that. So that is a very good thing. Getting double the memory from those old MacBook Airs is one of the highlights of this machine. And the best part about all of that is the price point. So Apple didn't give you double the storage and keep the price the same or raise the price. They actually dropped the price this year. This starting configuration, the 256 gigabyte model with 16 gigabytes of memory, is only $999. So this is the cheapest a modern MacBook Air with the latest specs has been in quite some time. I think the last time Apple shipped the MacBook Air at $999 was with the M1 version, which everyone agreed was a great value. So it's been about 3 years since we've had a $999 MacBook Air with the latest specs. And that's what you're basically getting with this version. But the question does always arise whenever I do a video on consumer-friendly Macs, because even though this isn't really a pro machine and it's not meant for those pro-level workloads, the question always does come up of, Greg, is the MacBook Air good enough for video editing? Is it good enough for photo editing? Is it good enough for coding development? Can I play a game on it? And the answer to all of that is yes. This is a very powerful machine. I mean, it technically has the same level of performance as Apple's M4 MacBook Pro. It is the same exact chip. The only performance difference between the M4 MacBook Pro and the Air is that the Pro has a fan in it to help cool the chip off. So let's say, for example, you're exporting a video project and it's a long video project. It's gonna take, like 10 minutes or longer. That's gonna be faster on the M4 MacBook Pro because as the chip heats up, it has the fan to help cool it off and keep the performance exactly the same. Whereas with the M4 MacBook Air, if it does get too hot, it has to lower the chip's performance to cool the chip down. That's the only way it can do it. So it throttles down performance a little bit and it'll result in like a slightly longer export time. But you can still do a lot of these creative or pro level tasks, even on this base level M4 MacBook Air. Like, if you're on a budget and all you can afford is this MacBook Air, and you're looking at like the $1,600 M4 MacBook Pro and you're wondering, oh, if I get this M4 MacBook Air, I'm not gonna be able to do a lot of the tasks I wanna do on that machine. No, don't think like that. This thing can certainly do a lot of those higher end tasks, no problem. And there's not much that Apple did here to make this a better laptop. I mean, we expect these every year to get a little bit stronger with a new chip, but the only thing that Apple really did here to make this a great laptop is they dropped the price and they doubled the starting memory. And that's really all it took to make this a much better value. This is such a good machine. I can recommend this to almost anyone who's looking for a solid laptop that's thin and light, very portable, great battery life, great performance. There's really no catch here, even on the base model. There's no if, ands, or buts, or you have to look out for this. Maybe, if you want to complain a little bit, starting storage, 256 gigabytes, maybe a little bit low for some users, but even then, you could just upgrade the storage to 512. You'll probably be fine, it's $200 more, but hey, it is a far cry from where we used to be, where we said, well, the base model, the memory might be a little bit low, and it's $1,200, so if you buy 256 gigabytes more storage, now it's all of a sudden, it's like $1,400, $1,600, Now we can just say, hey, this thing's $1,000, it'll run fine, don't worry about it, and that's great. Great laptop. If you're in the market for a MacBook, especially a MacBook Air, I don't think there's been a better time to buy a new one in probably like the last decade. If you have an old Intel machine, if you're on an M1 and maybe you didn't spec it out right or it's running a little slow nowadays, I would say now is the time to upgrade. Get the M4 MacBook Air. It is really good. All right, I hope this video helped you out. If you did, please give me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. If you want to buy an M4 MacBook Air and help the channel out, check out the affiliate link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.